and he's viewing them over and over and over again, or the first time he's even exposed to them, he sees them and he masturbates to them. Well, the way the brain is set up is it's supposed to set up and learn things. It's supposed to adapt to what's going on. And so when he goes back to that pornography, he's going to say, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I need something a little bit more than this time. And so he's going to look at a few more images. And so he's going to need a few more images the next time around to get the same kind of arousal. And so he's going to probably go through that pattern again, and he might masturbate to it, and the brain's going to adapt to it. And it's going to say, all right, well, the next time we want you to look at a few more things, right? And you have to look at more and more images. So what's being trained actually is kind of tied to the nature of the viewing. So if that guy goes to the pornography, and let's say he goes to a lesbian site, and he views this lesbian site and he becomes aroused to it and he masturbates to it, he might go back to that same lesbian site. And he might even want the same models the next time, but he might need more pictures from those same models. So what he's doing now is he's adapting and he's training himself to want this particular type of pornography and maybe even these particular models. Now another guy might go to just, a standard fare pornographic site with heterosexual sex, and he looks at it and he becomes aroused to it, and then he only sees there's like 4 or 5 different, pictures to it. And he gets to the end of it and he doesn't feel like he's sufficiently aroused, so he'll go to a different set of actors and a different set of women, and that builds up even more arousal. And then he finally masturbates to it, and what he's trained himself to do is now to need multiple different actors and multiple different pictures. Well, after a while, he may get to a place where the pictures just don't do it for him. Now he needs to see some live action. So he might go and download some video clips or go to one of these sites where he can view the 10-second clips, and then that will produce even more arousal because the motion picture of the kind of live action pornography is a little more natural than just these still photographs are. Even the still photographs in series, a still photograph by itself just produces one level of arousal. A set of pictures of the same actress or the same couple engaging in a sexual act kind of tell a little bit of a sexual story there, don't they? But if you've got now this motion picture, well, guys will just go for that. And so what happens is they'll progress from maybe one picture that they become aroused to a series of pictures, now to needing more and more with each time because the brain's adapting each time.
So let's look at this in the light of the guy who sees child pornography. But originally would not be the kind of guy that would be engaged in that. And then 6 months down the line, you find him engaging in child pornography.
Sure, yeah. Anytime you're exposing yourself, because oftentimes men will report that they are exposed to child pornography while they're viewing other pornography. And if you just think about that from a neurological standpoint, that child pornography is now inserted into the sequence and that is part of this particular sexual act. So even though it may have disgusted them, if they were looking at a bunch of pictures or watching some porn and then they found some child pornography, they jumped away from it, and then they went back and viewed a little bit of what they would call their normal porn, and then they masturbated to it, the brain doesn't care. That's part of now this particular sexual act. So now they might be more predisposed to maybe linger a little bit longer on that child porn the next time, or to go back to that same site. And so it's not like they're just jumping into the deep end of the pool. They're more wading into this deep end, and then just like with the pools, there's that drop off, and they might end up dropping off because the brain's adapting to this. But it's thinking especially about how people get into different types of fetishes or into child pornography. These things have consequences, and the pornography is not just about the pictures that you come in and they come into you and you see them and then they disappear. They linger and they stay, and the things that stay generally are the things that have emotional content to them. And the things that have emotional content to them are things that for example, with a lot of guys, the first time they ever saw any pornography, that initiated a response in them. It had huge emotional content to it. Some guys will remember, the models that they regularly masturbate to because that masturbation has an emotional content to it because it's activating the emotional regions in the brain. So it's not just what's going on right at the moment of masturbation, it's everything that was part of that sexual arousal sequence that gets you to that place that's what's laid down.
Applying that to us on a social level, that really means that as a society, we will be pushing deeper and deeper into more derogatory styles of pornography in our media and what we consume and see as a norm on everyday life?
I would say that's kind of obvious, isn't it? I mean, you just look at what's on television now versus what was on television, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, there are things that are allowed to be on regular television that would never have gotten past the censors back in the 70s or the 80s. But what's happening is as we get more of it, we keep pushing the envelope further and further because we kind of need to. Because, just watching stuff that was titillating back in the 80s doesn't do it anymore. Baywatch was great, in the 80s and the early 90s for people. It's not a big deal now. Now we need to see even more skin. Now we need to see, simulated sex. Now we need to see, completely naked people with, the nipples and the pubic hair blacked out, in order to get a charge out of it. So this notion of sexual arousal is something that you can be trained into. That sexual stimuli in our environment actually will desensitize us so that we need something more and more severe. And we get to a place where even the normal stuff doesn't work anymore. That guys who continually look at porn over and over again, when they get with a real naked woman, she's not sufficient to arouse him. So he needs to watch porn while he's with this woman in order to get sufficiently aroused. So, goodness, to think that you can view pornography and it not have any lasting consequences is just neurologically naive. It just doesn't happen. Wow. To look at the types of things that, let's say you go to the grocery store and there's Cosmo, or there's, any number of magazines or Maxim magazine or something like that. To a certain extent, you're desensitized to it so it doesn't elicit the same level of arousal that it would in a person who's never seen something like that before. But what it does is it starts the slow trickle that will get in, and then thoughts will begin to be entertained, and then rather than just kind of looking at the image of the naked woman, that now the man, because of his extensive training in pornography, he can now begin to fantasize even more about it. And even the fantasizing of engaging in the sexual act is sufficient to cause the sexual arousal to go up. As a guy thinks more about pornography during the day, he doesn't need to see it. He's going to get more and more horny. This is just a result of thinking about it more and more. That because he's got all of these images that are stored in his brain, he can pull them up in a millisecond's notice and start to now entertain, what was the last time I looked at that? And well, that was really good, and remember that scene? Or maybe, what would I would like to do if I could insert myself into this scene? So the fantasy now begins to be played out neurologically, and it has still the same physiological consequences on the body. The body's ramping itself up thinking, hey, I'm going to get laid soon. And so what it does is it now starts to become more and more aroused, and so the man feels that need, and so what does he do? He goes back to the habit that he's used to meet that need, and he then follows through the script.
Help us understand it a little bit better. Do you have some sort of analogy to explain how repeated exposure to pornography would affect you?
At one point, the Grand Canyon was not the Grand Canyon. At some point, water started going down this particular pathway, and the next time it rained, the water went down that pathway, and every time it rained, the water went down that pathway, and the Grand Canyon got deeper and deeper and deeper. That's the way that it happens. Same thing goes with the brain. When that water comes in, when that visual sexual image comes in, it's going to look for the easiest pathway to go to. And when men start making that pathway tied to pornography, it's going to dig that rut deeper and deeper and deeper so that all sexual stimuli, in fact, even some non-sexual stimuli, now begin to be processed as sexually arousing. And so to use the analogy of the Grand Canyon, that's what many guys are making in their brains when they're viewing porn and they're masturbating to it over and over again, is every raindrop that falls is going to find its way through the Grand Canyon.
Scene 1, take 5. What would you say to the average guy out there that is in a world saturated with pornography?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with what's their history. Maybe they've got a relationship with pornography, and they might not really feel like, let's say last night they acted out, and they say, well, I viewed some porn last night, and today I don't really feel they need to. Well, that denies the reality that you've got a neurological history here, right? You've kind of already got this system in place. So what you'll find is that this will begin to kind of spill out into other areas of your life. And so women at work will not be viewed in the same way because you're viewing pornography. You're going to view them as potential sexual partners. You're going to be maybe even internally thinking, just kind of fantasizing about them during the day. So there are consequences in that area.